While she's getting set up, if you guys want to go ahead and turn to page 9, we can at least, I think we're a little farther than that, but at least that'll get us a little closer to where we actually are in there.
Yeah, have donuts, please. The coffee will be ready in just a
Just
second.
9 last time.
I think we've worked a little bit into 2.
Well, I think I left after you got there, maybe that was week.
Oh, I think we went to.
We were into 2.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
Barb was so gracious to have brought her.
We were.
I think we got through the bottom of page 9.
Yep.
We were actually, yeah. We were.
I think we stopped bottom of page 9 after the order of business at council session.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I think we should be starting top of
207.
page, probably
Yeah, we
starting
were gonna-
top of page 10.
Because we talked about adding the, anyone have a conflict of interest onto.
And we talked about old, continuing business and I think that's what we've gotten to.
When you're ready to open, Barb.
Oh. Motion to open the meeting.
You can just
Did I
open
just-
it.
okay, the meeting's
It's just
open.
a work session. so you can open it.
Okay.
2.07, was there anything left on 206 at the top that we need to
It should say
discuss?
probably a majority instead of the majority. In the first line,
Okay,
because there's more than one majority.
sure.
I was confused by the members who are present and eligible to vote. If you're present, why wouldn't you be eligible to vote?
Conflict.
Conflict of interest. Nice catch. Got that quick.
Yeah.
He's been studying.
Not even awake.
Anything else before we move on to 207? All right, under 207, you'll see that it's preparation of the agenda and the consent agenda. You can see there, the scenario we've usually set up and followed has been that myself and the mayor in consultation with the city clerk have usually worked out setting the agenda. Of course, our practice has typically been, if anyone, not just council members, but if anyone comes and asks for something to be on the agenda, we may advise them on whether or not we think that it's something that should be on the agenda, but if they want something on the agenda, it goes on the agenda. We've never turned anyone away that wants to put something on the agenda.
Right at that moment.
Well, I mean, for the next meeting.
For
The limiting factors here are, of course, the 24-hour roll situation. And right now, we've set it up as the deadline is being is Friday morning. Because in order for us to get the council packets ready for you, we've kind of set up Friday as being the day we get the council packets ready. So with the council meeting, we would have to have it set by 5 p.m. on Monday night. But if we do that, your council packets may not be as accurate as possible until Monday. And the whole idea of keeping Friday as the deadline, even though we moved the council meeting, was the idea that it gave you guys an extra day or so to review the packets prior to the council meeting. And of course, that was one of the things we said we'd kind of discuss, is whether or not we thought that system was working or not. I haven't seen any conflicts. I think I've had one person that wanted to come on a Monday and asked for something to be put on a Tuesday. I believe that might have been George Glass came and asked to have something put on the agenda on Monday, and I informed him that he had missed the cutoff that we had previously set for being on the agenda.
As long as the public is informed the best we can, I think it's okay. They need to just know that that's, and
Well, it's been that way
maybe in
for-
one of our newsletters, we reiterate that point.
You know, but let's say if somebody comes in on Monday, it's before 5 p.m., even though it doesn't get into our packets, I mean, can't we ad-lib it? and-
Well, the only danger there, Bill, is I would say if it's an emergency circumstance, I would probably call Barb and say, Barb, I've got something here.
Okay.
Absolutely should be on the agenda, something you know, if this grant application is not put in by Thursday, it's not going to happen, and we either need to add it or we need to have a special council meeting maybe following a day later to do it, I would probably go ahead and call Barb and get permission at that time to put it on.
Okay.
If it was somebody who's mad and just wants to come and rave, usually what I'll do in those cases is, if you're not truly asking the council to take action on something immediately, you can always come to the items not on the agenda, voice your opinion at that time, and even if it's something you want them to want the council to take action on, all that's going to happen is they're going to hear you that night, and then 2 weeks later they can take up the issue for action. But I try to universally keep pretty hard line on people that if they aren't there by noon on Friday, we don't incorporate them into the agenda, because you want consistency. You don't want to have people running around saying, well, you let me do it, you didn't let him do it, and you're showing favoritism here. I can't think of a time where we've actually added something after typically our cutoff. I can think in the 6 years I've been here, back when we had council meetings on Monday night, I remember having a couple of times where I had something that I was getting ready for the council packet that I didn't have the information from the lawyers or from the engineers. And what I go ahead and do is put it on the agenda. And you've seen it several times where we might get additional information after it's put on the agenda, and I'll either put it in the packets that are already still sitting over there, or I'll put them at your council location so that you'll see stuff sitting on the desk for you to grab up if you come around.
I have a question on number 4. We have never done this. Is it important? Do you want to add this? It says, the presiding officer shall inquire if any council member desires to have an item withdrawn. I don't believe in 6 years we've ever asked if any council person, is that important? Do you want that added?
I think they can speak up for themselves. If you want to take something up, we've talked about it before.
Right, but should it be part of the formal procedure is what I'm asking.
Do you want her to ask, or do you want it to be on a request basis?
That's my
I guess it
question.
doesn't make any difference to me.
Well, it says in number 4, prior to voting on the motion to adopt the consent agenda, the presiding officer shall inquire.
Right.
So that's what we're
That's
asking,
not
do
a-
we want to
We don't
change
have
it?
to,
Or
we
Right.
don't have to do
Right.
that, but I'm asking if you want it, then it needs to be placed.
What if we just said, I mean, as a reminder, any member may request, any council member may request removing
Okay.
an item
Right,
from
I just-
consent agenda for individual consideration.
And Gary, for your input, because I know you weren't here when we did this back in January, there is discussion of putting liquor license and other permit-related activity and some other approval of changes of gas operation manuals and things, that instead of leaving them in miscellaneous or in permits, a lot of that stuff may end up getting moved to the consent agenda. Because the idea behind the consent agenda is if there's a belief that none of you are going to oppose it, to push it into there. And the idea, I think, of this language is if you see anything in that list that you have questions or concerns about, you have the power to ask to have it moved to the regular agenda discussed at that time.
Makes sense.
Like that.
It does make good sense.
Is there anything else we want to talk about on 07?
So we're going to leave it as
Well, what'll happen is that after we get done with this document, because we have some changes from last time, I'll draft and probably try to get it to you at least a week before the council meeting, so you guys can all look over it, and then we'll have a discussion of it, but I'll put a resolution on, an amended resolution on the agenda.
I think it's fine to leave it there. I mean, I'd actually kind of forgotten that we can strike something from the agenda. I read this over a long time ago. Now I'm being reminded of it. Oh, we could do that. Not that I have anything in intention, but that might be a tool that somebody may want to use.
Well, and where you see it most commonly used in the state of Iowa is you look over the claims list and you have an issue with a bill being paid. You can ask that one payment be stricken from the consent agenda and be placed in the miscellaneous discussion items. and then we can discuss just that one claim. That's what you see it most commonly used in the state of Iowa, is to take that type of action.
I think number 4 really only applies to the consent agenda.
It only applies to the
Right.
consent agenda.
I think it's good. I don't know that you have to ask. I mean, I think as long as it's in there that people may request to remove it.
Sure.
Anything else on 07? All right, moving on to 08. This is quite an element here, and I'll be real honest, and I think that all of us here can be honest and fair here. We've not done a good job of always following this process, and when this process
And
was...
I have some real concerns and questions.
And remember, the idea here is not to make us do what this says. It's to make this within the confines of what the state says, and in this case, there's not much rules, but it's to make this.
Is it done? Just
it-
help yourself to a cup out of the cupboard. I'm sorry.
It's to make this match what we want to do at council meetings. To go into it a little bit, you'll see that there's a public forum there, which is, our public forums are items not on the agenda, of course. And you will see there is, you'll see where it discusses in there quite a lengthy process. Now, to give you an idea, here's some of the ways I've seen other city councils do this. One scenario I have seen is that a city council requires that prior to 5 o'clock, the opening of the meeting, that people have to sign a card or something and turn a card in to the city clerk or the sergeant of arms saying that they wish to speak, and it even requires them to put what item they wish to speak upon. And then those are handed over to the presiding officer, which would be the mayor, at 5 o'clock for the meeting. I mean, usually these processes are a little more restrictive, not less restrictive. We've been very loose in our process about allowing people to speak. What our language basically states is it gives a time limit on how long they're allowed to speak if they're not on the agenda.
I want to
If-
speak to that.
Sure.
I think that's where we've gotten into trouble because we had no procedure for who was going to time, what they were going to time with, and it was just left up in the air. So I think there needs to be a procedure of, if Sandy isn't there, who's going to do it? And if she is there, who's going to do it? And it has to be done the same way every time. So that would be my request, please.
Well, later in the document, it does say that the chief of police or his representative of service sergeant at arms, that would seem like a logical thing for that person to do.
Right, but sometimes we
She
don't
is-
always have anybody there.
Well, it's very uncommon for us to either have Sandy not there or a cop not there.
Right, so I think we need to have a formal in writing, so I will do that. I mean, it would just make it a whole lot.
And I think that person that's timing and keeping track of that should be separate from the city administrator and the mayor, because when,
Yeah.
I do too.
I know,
I agree.
or if you're the secretary and you're taking notes, you're not participating in the meeting like,
Right.
and if you're the timekeeper, you're paying attention to the, you're not directed towards your thinking processes, and you're both in a situation of decision making.
I mean, you've seen where, and I probably overemphasized the situation on many cases. I'll be thinking about how I'm going to be talking about something, and oh yeah, now I got to do a vote, and it completely cuts my train of thought. I mean, it is it does cause a little bit of wonkiness in the process for that to happen, and.
Actually, on page 16, item 2.23, says the chief of police or a designee shall be the sergeant at arms of the council.
I thought we voted on that once. I thought we had Barb. It's a sergeant.
She's the presiding officer.
Just the presiding.
She is the presiding officer.
I mean, I'm just
No,
saying,
we should.
I'm just saying what is here. And that would seem like a job for the sergeant at arms, and it is defined here on page 16 as who that person is.
I'm not arguing about it, I just want a decision made.
Should we spell it out right here, like on page 16, one of the, or in the
Or
Did I
if we,
hear that as the sergeant of arms, one of the duties shall be timekeeping and so on, or?
generally,
So if John's not there, then who's gonna be the
I
designee?
would
That's
say-
the other thing we need to decide.
I would say that the designee process would of course be whatever officer would be replacing him. And then what we would say in the end.
But there's been times where we haven't had an officer there at all.
Right.
So
And I think,
then, it's very rare, I understand, but
yeah,
so the designee then could go to Sandy or to,
right. It does say the chief of police or a designee.
right.
So, I mean, in most cases, I would say a police officer would be the designee, but not when the case when an officer's not there, it'd be up to the presiding officer. I would say at the very beginning of the meeting, if that's the case, we should identify who the designee is as the meeting officer. Now, I'd say that would be in the rare case where an officer is not in the room.
Okay.
for
And-
clarity's sake, then in 2.081, the presiding officer shall allow the comments subject to such limitations as the officer deems reasonable or appropriate, generally 5 minutes period. To put in a sentence, the sergeant at arms shall serve as the timekeeper.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's good.
Or the designee.
Or the designee, right?
Yeah, you have
Well,
to put
but-
that.
No, because
No,
it
you
says
don't have to.
the police chief or designee. That's identifying who the sergeant of arms
Right.
is.
Okay.
So whoever the sergeant of arms is has that authority.
Because the next section back further, so that's.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it just takes the pressure off of us to have somebody,
Well, back when we were going through that whole road thing,
Yeah, that would
it
have,
really
that
would
been
have
awesome.
eliminated a lot of issues back then, that street thing.
Absolutely. Okay,
Well, this is why we're doing this, man.
I guess backing up before that, the first sentence under 2.8, must acknowledge such on the agenda, or how do they acknowledge it? I mean, is that, do we wonder? All persons who desire to address the council on either agenda must acknowledge such on the agenda or at the appropriate time. It's
no,
just-
but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
saying,
it
right,
is kind of a wild.
I'm saying, what,
Makes no sense.
Do we even need that
No.
sentence in there?
no. I mean, it's like, what are we saying?
Yeah,
Because
I
we
don't have-
described the process in detail below.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that sentence.
And then in item number 2, below that, then who have acknowledged his desire to speak. I mean, and then the sentence that follows, the presiding officer shall first rule on the relevancy and appropriateness of the proposed public comments. How do you know
Yeah, I
whether
was
they're
gonna
relevant?
say that,
How do you know if they're relevant if they haven't?
The reason they use that language is if someone comes in and brings up a subject that is, say he claim, I'm trying to use a outlandish scenario. One of you is sleeping with my wife. That probably isn't happening in that case or something like that. There's certain things that the presiding officer does have the power to say that that's out of place, that is.
Once they start talking.
That is out of
Yeah.
scope, you are done, sir, you can sit
Right.
down.
Yeah.
This is not for this body to listen to, and you
If
have.
it doesn't pertain to the relevant
Right.
topic at hand,
Right.
relevant.
And that's kind of why that language is in there.
But as
Is
a-
that if it's, ideally, if they're going to stand up and say, hi, I'm Adam Ledford, I'm here to speak about the conduct of Gary Hansen. And she can, that's
Not
kind of the way
appropriate,
this is
not-
supposed to
yeah.
work, is they're supposed to identify who they are and what they're speaking
Yeah, that's
about
the
when
other
they
thing we
stand
never
up.
did.
If what they identify that they're speaking about is a questionable subject, the presiding officer can say, I question whether or not this is something we should be discussing at this time. I'm not going to allow it to continue. And of course, there's a process for the council members to allow it to continue. But I am not going to allow it to attend without their objection. And if you'd like to see me, we can discuss this further and decide if it needs to be placed on the agenda or not. And she does have the authority to make that
The
decision.
other thing that I think we should address is that we've
Sorry, Karen.
allowed them to just stand up where they
I
are,
was just
maybe
gonna go
even
there.
sit
It says the
down.
podium.
And it's the podium, the table, and if so, then we should
We need to
follow
make
that
them
rule
come up.
all the
Yep.
time. Cause it's been loose, it's like,
Mhm.
and then we have people popping up all over, and we wanna hear them, but we want to have some order to it.
And the idea behind making them come up to the podium or the table, and I think we should identify the table
Table.
in there, is that then they're not just addressing part of the room, they're standing in front of all of you, so they're addressing all of you. Because if they're standing behind Gary and Tom, they may not be, for instance, Curtis sits, Mike set his camera up in the corner of the room. When he's talking, it's difficult for the two of you to turn around and see what he's talking about back there. So by requiring somebody to come up to the podium to speak means that all of you have full opportunity to communicate.
And not only that, they get the attention of any audience that's there too, because a lot of times there's this little Twitter chitter chatter going on, and when they're up front, they have full attention of anybody that's in the room.
And I think it's important to enforce, that they state their name, address, and
Right.
general subject of the presentation. A lot of times people just start taking off.
Right.
And I'd call them on it, it brings the formality, plus it's gonna keep the audience from
Right.
chiming right in now that it's been determined that it's now formal. We state our name, address, and whatever before we speak.
When this, sorry.
Because should that part of the notation be put right on our agenda where it has the opportunity for the public to speak? But the procedure required if you do want to make a
Not a bad
statement?
idea, actually.
That's probably a good idea.
And I think also by stating names, if people are listening to an audio of the meeting, they know who's talking.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, even though we may all know who's there, if you're listening to an audio of it,
May not.
Because depending where you are, you might get the back of their head and people might not know who they are.
Well, and the other thing is if they're communicating from all different directions of the room, an audio may not pick it up because,
Right.
whereas if all the communication's primarily going on right there in the core center of the room, all the communication should be picked up.
I think we know why. Let's move on.
There are two elements of this I do want to just identify whether anybody has an issue with it or not, but they were debated quite a bit when this language was first put together. One is you see a lot of 5-minute information mentioned in here. 5 minutes, good, bad, enough, not
I
enough,
think it's plenty.
I think it's.
okay?
and it says generally 5 minutes, so it
It
can be.
stated by the presiding officer what the limit is.
Because when we were doing that and there were so many people in the room, we had actually talked about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But this gives us the flexibility, if there's 20 people wanting to speak, you could go for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 2, you better change podium to table too.
I've got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other element of this that was communicated and we have not enforced, and it might somewhat, I don't know that it will be covered by just putting it on the agenda itself. People have a habit, and this hasn't been such a problem since we've been doing a better job of communicating to people. People have a habit of bringing one copy in for the council or one
Oh,
copy
yeah.
in to put in
Oh.
their packet. And then, and so one thing we've not been tough at enforcing is if you're gonna bring paperwork in for the council, you need to bring enough copies, enough copies to cover the entire group. And that's something that we've not been tough in enforcing when people bring stuff in.
Well, maybe in the newsletter you just put a little thing about meeting procedure, and put in those items that they need to be informed about. And if they don't read it, it's their problem, but
I
at
mean,
least
we
we've tried.
specifically say here, no less than 10 copies of the citizen's letter or other documents or any attachments must be delivered to the clerk.
Right.
I mean, it's,
One question I did have, do we need to look at a way for someone, maybe not necessarily the public, but should we have a way that someone can actually easily do a PowerPoint or some other kind of visual presentation to the council?
arguably, if they communicate to us in
Yeah.
advance,
We do.
I have obtained a screen on our behalf, and we do have the library's projector, which we own, so it's always available. Where we would fall into trouble is if somebody shows up and hasn't communicated to us they want to do a projector screen. Because, we're not going to have the projector right there on site. The screen, I think, is actually sitting in the room now. So, I mean, other than the process of, I would think what we probably want to include in our communication to people is if you plan to provide some kind of presentation, electronic presentation, you need to pre-notify the city office. Because otherwise, they're gonna show up and then here, the meeting's getting ready to start, and what are we doing? We're setting up a table, we're setting up a projector, we're setting up a screen. We shouldn't have to be rushing at the last minute.
Right.
Because that's becoming more and more the thing, don't you think that we should be looking at a way, maybe not now, maybe make it one of our goals to make it available so that if somebody did come in, or if a company comes in and wants to do a presentation, a lot of times they bring their own, but as a professional business, shouldn't we be equipped and able to do these things? Or don't you think it's necessary?
Well, we are,
do
if we
it all
know ahead of
now?
time. I mean, I wouldn't think it would be necessary for us to purchase one. I think that would be an unnecessary purchase. We've already got one at the library.
But what about, I'm just thinking, a screen that you just pull down in your window.
We've got one, he said.
It's not, it's a,
No, you have to put the stand up.
Oh,
But I
it's
mean,
the old, it works, it's a screen.
I basically got it free for the city.
okay, never mind, let's go on. Irrelevant, I guess.
Bottom of page 10, the last line, the word "there" should be "these."
What did you say?
Last line, bottom of 10, where it says "their rules,"
Yeah.
it should be "these rules."
Yeah.
And another thing too, if we know, on the bottom of page 10 as well, if we know that there's gonna be a meeting that's gonna be highly contentious, a lot of,
Well, there was that at that street meeting,
Yeah.
where there was applause and.
right, and if we know, we know when those are gonna, that there's a chance. And I think we just have to spell that out ahead of time, there should be exactly as it's, no demonstrations, applause, booing, or cheers during the conclusion, or during or at the conclusion of a person speaking. That's, and I think, the mayor, or if any of us are thinking that things are getting out of hand, call it to the attention, so that does not happen, that we maintain control and not let the crowd take control.
Yeah, and the
Right,
whole thing
definitely.
with that whole thing was that there was no timing done. There was no, and we set it up, and when you say there's going to be, and if I don't know if it's 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I can't distinguish one person against another, because then they'll say, well, you got 2 minutes and I got 10 minutes and there was no time held, and that sets us in a very bad place.
Yeah.
And as far as the clapping, booing, and that kind of stuff, the easiest way, it would be nice to have it never, if it does, we've got a sergeant at arms. All you really have to say is, thank you, thank you for not making any public demonstrations of approval or disapproval.
And we need to educate ourselves, all of our potential sergeant of arms, all the police officers of that. And when we're going into one of those contentious meetings, a heads up and a reminder, refreshment ahead of time.
Right.
Anything else on 2.08? I figured there'd be quite a bit of conversation.
So will you have that conversation? Will you have that conversation with the police officers?
Sure.
That's like,
Thank you for the donuts, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
One thing I will point out is number 5 before we move on. And I thought it was important to kind of read this one, because this is something that we don't really talk about a whole lot, but it is a scenario and an option for the case of the council. When written citizen communications on subject matters that are not on the agenda shall be addressed as follows. The presiding officer may place the matter on a future agenda for formal action, refer the matter to the city administrator for an investigation and report with direction to bring it back as an agenda item on a later date, or accept and file. Basically taking no action if you're accepting and filing. You've heard me generically say, or at least some of you that's been here for years have generically heard me say, when we've received communication requesting action, well, you have a couple options here. You can either ask me to put it on the agenda in the future, you can ask me to do some more. This is just a formal communication of when that issue comes up, why I say what I say. That's kind of the process we've been following without really talking about it in any detail. But I want you to kind of be aware of it. You kind of have some options when somebody says, I think we should remove snow the moment the snow starts coming down. you can ask me to put it on the agenda, you can ask to have it on the agenda, you can ask to have it investigated more, or you can simply, if you say nothing, you take no communication of action, I will take that, I take that as an action that you're not asking that any action be taken. So, so that's kind of the way I've always approached it. If that's not what you guys want, that's, let me know, please.
Backing up in number 4, looking at the end of the second line of the third line. Shall be received by the city clerk no later than the council session. What we really mean there is we're saying Friday at noon?
No, because the reason why we wanted to leave that flexibly open is because a lot of people have a tendency to bring things with them to council meetings. We always try to advise people, like Ashley came to the council meeting Tuesday night. We communicated with her on Friday, 1, to make sure she was still going to be on the agenda, and 2, to ask her if she had anything she wanted us to include in the packet. She needed to let us have it by noon on Friday. That wouldn't preclude her from showing up at council meeting, arguably with 10 copies,
Okay.
and hand it out to the people in the room.
So the next, but this will allow sufficient time? The next set,
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
maybe the next sentence is just not needed then.
Not needed.
Mm-mm.
Because all it really does is, they call that in the legal world dicta. Has no place.
Perfect.
What are they called?
Dicta.
Dicta?
DICTA.
Do we have anything else on the way? We need to keep trying to move. 9 is voting. A lot of this is somewhat set by the state. We don't have a whole lot of say in this process. I'll give you a moment to kind of skim over it and see if you have any comments or questions on it. I mean, other than if you've got something from a language standpoint.
The last line in F should be and instead of an.
Okay. Yep. Anyone have anything they want to talk about in 9, voting procedures?
You know, here's what I think that we should call to our attention. The mayor may vote to break a tie vote on motions not involving ordinances, resolutions, or appointments made by the council alone.
Not a whole lot of those.
Very often have those.
All right, moving on to 10, if we have anything. Advisory committees. I would give you the example, an advisory committee to a nice, easy way to explain new advisory committees is the facade committee. The idea behind an advisory committee to some degree, we want to stay away from it to some degree, because what you want is you want a committee created by council. I mean, that creates the full authority to take action. So it's one thing, usually you create an advisory committee is usually typically made for a short-term purpose, for less than a year, typically is the concept there. If you're going to have a committee that's going to continue to exist past 12 months, you typically would want to create and establish that committee through council. That's one reason why when the facade project committee came up, in the end, it really needed to be approved by the council to create the facade committee, because this committee was going to last past a year. It really is not an advisory committee. All our committees are advisory committees in one sense or another. Almost none of our committees have the authority to make a decision without direct action of the council. They can recommend action, they can't make action on their own behalf. A couple examples of where that's not exactly the case is the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment can roll on an action which can be reviewed by the city, but they actually can take an action on and upon themselves. Any questions, concerns? 10 is not very big. All right, number 11. A lot of information in number 11. A lot of it, from a schematical standpoint, is state law. talks about the power of the veto by the mayor. And this is something that we really don't talk about a whole lot, but the mayor has up to 14 days after final passage. If the mayor refuses to sign or takes effective action to attempt to veto something, she has up to 14 days in order to do that. So she doesn't even have to voice her opinion that night. She can make a decision. I say attempt because in the end, it's going to come back to the council to discuss whether or not they are going to override that veto. But
If there, a procedural question, if there is a veto and the council wants to override it, is that, so then do you have to have a motion? Does that have to be reintroduced?
God help us if we ever have that process, because I'm going to have to pull out the books and see what it says. I know it probably happens much more often in the state of Iowa than we'd probably be aware it does. Because, I mean, there are some cities where the relationship between the mayor and the council is not particularly on good standing, and I'm sure that stuff happens a lot more often than we expect. So I'm sure a call to the league would probably clear up that issue. That's one of those things that until it happens, I really haven't spent a whole lot of time educating myself on what the process
Well,
is.
before we do the final thing on this, we probably should have it in there. Not that I plan to do that anytime soon, but
Sure.
it does belong in there.
Sure, I will find out and include it.
Sorry to back up, the last sentence of 10, minutes shall be taken of all committees. Is there a period of time that they're maintained?
I'm sorry, I was trying to do two things at once, write and listen.
Okay, backing up here to the last sentence before number 11.
Yes.
Minutes shall be taken of all committee meetings. Is there a period of time they're supposed to be maintained?
Yes, but we maintain them indefinitely in the city office. We don't identify that. We just
Like with the facade committee, any minutes that are
Yes.
taken there, they're kept down at the city
Yes.
offices.
You, as Curtis can tell you very well, we have some folders down at the city office, and in some committees, you can go back, fire board, you can probably go back to what, 60s, 50s?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there's folders in the council room, actually, of every one of the committees that includes all of the minutes from all the previous meetings. Now granted, we started the folders in about 2004, so some of them are more complete than others. But if you go into the filing cabinet in the safe, I'm sure that we can pull you out minutes from committees, probably park board committees going back to the 30s.
May I ask something?
Sure.
You're identifying just committees in here. Do you keep minutes for street and alleys? Those
You
kind
mean
of
for
things?
like our internal subcommittees and things like that? No, we typically don't. Only because usually anything we're going to be discussing is, of course, as you're aware, they're open to the public if you want to come. If you want to, you've asked me a standing request, I know when we have some committee meetings. The other element of it is usually, how many times have we discussed something that doesn't end up in the hands of the council? I mean, that's the intent of the subcommittee, is kind of do a little pre-work prior to the fact that it's coming into the hands of the council. There are some exceptions, I can think to that. You know, some of the options that were considered during the street project were discussed at the street and alley committee meetings, as you know, but were never discussed probably in the actual council meeting. But,
All right, thank you.
211, item F, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line down. It should be vetoes and ordinance instead of and ordinance.
Yeah.
oh yes, I see what you're saying. Good. Does anyone else have any comments or questions about that? I don't want to spend too terribly much time on it because a lot of the process is set in stone for us. The next is resolutions. Resolutions, it just talks about some of the process there. It doesn't give you a whole lot of language there. Does anybody have anything in 12? Just that one little paragraph there at the bottom. All right, moving on to 13. 13 is ordinances. Once again, a lot of this process is set by the state, so the procedure isn't so much an issue here. You have the third readings process, you're familiar with that. You have an introduction process. One of the procedures we've typically used for waiving of readings is that if we believe it's something that we have to do, or it's something that we don't believe there's going to be a lot of public input in because there doesn't seem to be a lot of controversy about a certain issue, that's usually the type of things we end up waiving third readings on. We've usually used the practice of not waiving a second reading, only because a lot of times the first time people may be hearing about it is at a first reading. So we've usually erred away from waiving a second reading process. However, you do have the authority to request at any time, in any meeting, to waive a second or third reading of an ordinance. Council members have the authority to do that. Any other things, anything you want to discuss in 13?
E is probably an important one for everyone to know.
Yeah,
Shall not. D on page 13. Point.
that is why when Bruce come to see me about how he thought we maybe should consider some different options for our sewer rate increase, when I gave you those different 4 or 5 options, but I had it drafted in a particular way, I recommended to Bruce that if he did want to recommend it, and I think I even mentioned that at the council meeting, please make a motion to amend the ordinance, vote on that, then vote on passage of the first reading. Because if he was to make a motion to pass the first reading amended as such, and then it failed, you've now defeated the entire ordinance. And, that's one of those schematical things I think we try to get better at in the process, is make sure we identify that if we're playing around with things, then we know what we're voting on and not voting on in those circumstances. Anything else on 13? If not, moving on to 14. This one, we've not always done a real good job about how we follow the process here, and it's a messy situation. Any action of the council, including final action on applications for changes to land use, excluding reconsideration of actions previously considered. You can see there's a lot of legal language in this process. Some motions can be made only by a member of the prevailing side of the original action. A motion to reconsider may be at the same meeting, and in any event may be made no later than the next succeeding regular council meeting. A motion to reconsider is debated only if the action being reconsidered is debatable. Upon passage of the motion to reconsider, the subject matter is returned to the table anew at the next regular council meeting for any action the council deems advisable. So yes, we've not always done a good job of following that procedure to the T. And so I would say that anytime you might have an issue with the way something has passed and you plan on possibly trying to reverse a decision, I would remember, worst case scenario, pull this page out, read that through closely, and make sure you understand what your options are in that process. And then come talk to me so that I can kind of give you some advice on understanding what procedural steps you need to make that night in order to take that action.
Because I did that years ago. I called for the motion from a previous meeting.
Right.
Your mom was there too.
Now, one thing that is not clear to me, and I'll have to talk with the attorneys at the league, will probably be the best place to get this education, is you might notice it says in there, and it's really loose language, is that some can only be made by a member of the prevailing side. Well, what's that mean? When does that apply? When doesn't that apply? And so I would like to know for my own purposes when that applies and doesn't apply. Any other comments, questions on 14 before we move on to 15? 15, any comments on it? I was going to spend a whole lot of time about it. Anybody have anything on 15 or 16? You know, it gives you, top of page 14, first half of page 14 kind of gives you some options on what people who want to talk to the council, particularly, gives you more definition of information. That's where you should deliver 10 copies, information comes back. You know, we talk about council forum being available, discussions as well. Written request. Provide some different alternatives for people.
The third paragraph still has, at least in my copy, still has a Monday council session listed.
Okay. Yep. I will correct that.
Maybe we should,
Yeah,
maybe
take the day out.
just take the day out.
Okay.
I mean,
Because
that-
you may
Just
change
take
it
the word
again,
out and say
then-
following council session.
Yeah.
That should be it too.
Which, where?
If should be it, right after that sentence.
It is recommended.
It is recommended.
Anything else before we move on to 17? Under 17, you got council vacancies. That procedure, there's only really two options in law, and they're playing around with that at the legislature right now. And the way it reads now is it either has to be the next election, or you can appoint, or you can have a special election, or if you appoint, that appointment's only good to the next regular election. They're looking to change that language at the state, and so until they come with a concrete answer there, I wouldn't recommend much changing in. We really only have two options there. Our practice, our precedent has been to appoint. Typically, we look to see who the next closest vote getter was in the last election in order to see if they're interested, is usually our primary person that we contact to see if they're still interested. 18 talks about photographs, motion pictures, videotaping. Any issues with that, Curtis? Doesn't really say a whole heck of a lot. Just basically says flash. We don't want flashy.
You could certainly change to let me bring 30 key lights in if you.
Protect you from the heat of the lights.
And we'd have to have a half an hour before, so we could all get our makeup on. They were
Yeah.
talking about that this morning on the news.
19 is just travel expenses. 20 is suspension of rules. 21 is amendments to this rules of procedure.
Okay, provided the proposed amendments or new rules shall have been introduced into the meeting into the record at a prior meeting.
Yeah, the way that would typically work is what we would do is I'd have it on the agenda discussion item the first time, assuming that once the full council's read through this and had a discussion, then the following meeting we'd have a vote on it. We don't have to do that process.
Well, I tell you what, if we've gone through this whole process and we've all okayed it and said it was good, is all of that necessary?
No.
I mean, we're doing that to make sure that we all get it and it's all
What if
right,
we
so.
just put a period after members of the council, get rid of provided the proposed amendments? These rules of procedure may be amended or new rules
Yep,
adopted by
and
a
just
majority
eliminate everything
vote of all
past
members of
the
the
council.
council, period.
Sure.
Yeah.
And one practice we've used in the past, Bill and Gary will kind of know this. I don't know if it's really came up since Teresa. Yeah, it has come up since Teresa's been on the council. Typically, if we have something where we're making a major change to our procedures or my performance evaluation or things like that, we usually try very hard to have everybody in the room in those type of discussions so that everyone has a say in the process. And sometimes that causes difficulty because we delay things as a result of that sometimes.
We had a small, I'm going back because it wasn't clarified and we didn't bring it up again.
Sure.
We had a small discussion about Robert's Rules of Order, and typically we have discussed it and then made the motion. Do you want to change it to make the motion, have the discussion, and vote?
The most common practice in Robert's Rules of Order is for a motion to be made, a second to be made, and then discussion to occur on an issue.
And then vote.
And then vote.
All right.
That is
Just tell me.
typically the most common practice.
Is that the way you want it to go?
A motion, and then a second, and then discussion.
And then discussion?
Yeah, but oftentimes the discussion leads what the motion's gonna be. You know, so I get a feeling for how everyone else is thinking and kind of where this is going. And a lot of times you don't know what everyone else is thinking until you discuss it.
Maybe a discussion, then a motion in a second, in other words.
You could ask for questions again, I guess, but I just want
You
clarification.
can still put a second discussion after the second's been made, just what you said. But I like the idea. I still like our way of doing it, discussing it first.
Yeah,
I do
I
too.
do too.
I mean, but Robert's rules also does say that, you know, the presiding officer may introduce an item for discussion. I mean, the other thing that some people do is you can vote to bring it, you can do a motion to bring it up for discussion. I mean, if you want, you know, which, I mean, at least is one way of saying that there's enough interest to discuss it. Sort of like where we have to introduce an ordinance or, you know, something like that. I mean, that would be an option. I'm not saying I was.
So in the most wonky scenario, what you have is trying to introduce an ordinance. Because ordinances are gonna be the weirdest process. What you would have is you would have somebody offer to introduce an ordinance. Then you would have a motion to open the floor for discussion. If there's no second, is there a motion to pass the first reading? Yeah, all right, is there a second? Yeah, and then we vote on passing the first reading. The other way would be is if there's a motion and a second to discuss it, and there's a vote on discussion, okay, now we're going to discuss it. All right, now the floor is open to discussion. Let's discuss the matter.
And then we start all over with the motion and a second
Yeah.
to
Which is,
okay it.
I mean, which is, I'm not sure that's where we need to go. I'm
Well, the
just saying-
second step in that is then you have to, you're gonna make a motion to close discussion. You're gonna have a second to that, and you're gonna have a vote to close discussion. Then once discussion is closed, you're gonna have a motion and second to pass it. So that would be the official procedure we would need to follow.
That seems too much.
I'm simply asking, I mean, whatever you.
No, it's a good question, because I know Bruce has brought it up too.
Whatever, however
I-
you guys want to do it.
The one advantage, I think, of doing a motion and then discussing it is that it does encourage people to discuss it. Sometimes, I mean, as an outsider, sometimes I think looking at it,
There's no discussion, you're saying we just vote on it?
You know, and sometimes what has happened, I'll be sitting there thinking, okay, I'm gonna just kind of lay in the weeds and, you know, kind of hear what everyone else is thinking, and I really don't know. I don't have any particular item that I'm thinking of, but it has happened. Then all of a sudden, boom, there's a motion on the thing. I thought, God, we haven't even discussed this yet. If
Okay.
there was a formal, I'm just talking out loud, it's a little messy and long and drawn out, but on the other hand, it does make it formal that we've made the decision, okay, now we have stopped, now we're gonna vote.
Okay, so you want to then go ahead and make the motion and the second, have the discussion, and then move forward with, okay?
I'm not,
Bill's
I'm
saying he
just
would rather
saying,
have the discussion first before a motion and a second
Okay.
is made.
So
Well,
so
then
the
let's make
procedure
sure we
I
have
was-
discussion then, because sometimes well, maybe there's nothing to discuss, but I think a lot of times somebody's waiting for the next person to say something,
Right.
and it's all quiet, you know, and
So the-
occasionally I ask, is there not any discussion on this?
So other than in the case of introducing a new ordinance, Barb,
Uh-huh.
your process would be, all right, item 6 on the agenda is this.
Yeah,
Is there a motion to open discussion? And if there's no action, go, okay, is there a motion to approve the,
okay, so you do want a motion to open discussion?
you would, if we're going to do discussion beforehand,
Okay.
you kind of need to do the motion process to open.
Okay, we've never done it that way, so maybe we've
Right.
been wrong, but motion to have discussion.
I think that would be helpful, and let's say
That's why I'm
somebody,
asking.
let's say somebody has something that they wanna get passed and pushed through quick and without, you know, all of a sudden, boom, the motion's on the floor. Now everybody has to vote, we haven't talked about it, we're caught,
Okay,
kinda like,
So you have a motion and a second to have discussion.
I'll have that written on your agenda. for
Okay,
this.
and
What-
then,
when we
okay.
pass it.
What
Well,
does
I-
everyone
I
else
get
think?
it,
I
just-
don't want to be the one.
I think it's a good idea, it might, it's gonna force some discussion.
Yeah.
If you have
Well,
something in the
that's-
back of your mind. you
The
wanna talk
only
about.
exception to this process is going to be when it's a brand new ordinance presented. When it's a brand new ordinance presented, the first step will not be asking for a motion to open discussion.
Introduce.
Your
It'll be
first step is
introduction.
going to be
Yeah.
introduction. Would anyone like to introduce it? Then it will be, would anybody like to make a motion to open discussion?
Okay.
I mean, I
Did you
know,
have a comment, excuse me, did you have a comment?
I'm just noting as an outsider that often what happens is you call for discussion right before the vote. And so there's a lot of, like, quick trying to get everybody's attention before the vote happens to have the discussion, because it's not really, it's not really formally allowed,
Okay.
So what you're saying is along Bill's lines of it would be better to have the discussion ahead of time.
Well, then everybody
Before
would
the-
know,
yeah.
everyone would know when to act on that info.
Okay. Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Now, the reason why that's worded the way that it is, and they use it in the U.S. Congress and state houses, is that allows the congressman to come back when they haven't been listening to the discussion section and actually vote. That's the reason why it's set up the way it is.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, does anybody else have anything in chapter 2? I think we are done with chapter 2. And other than that, it's 8 o'clock and we promised ourselves we wouldn't run past 8 o'clock.
Okay,
All right.
so circle 2.22.
So,
Unless you have anything else, there's the rest of what's in 2,
Yeah,
there isn't much there that, other than maybe some language issues, I think, that might come up. Is there anything else in 2 that you want? I think we can say we've
go
covered
to
2.
3, go to chapter 3 then?
Let's go to
The
chapter
next
3.
time?
I agree.
Okay.
do we want to actually
Barb, thank you.
work,
You're welcome.
work to
Bye, guys.
adopt chapters 1 and 2 of this?
Up to the council if you want to try to.
I don't want to do that. Wouldn't you want to have it in the formal, do the changes and bring it
I'd
back?
like to do it all kind of in
Okay.
one shot.
Because we don't really have anything in writing that we're adopting. It's still just,
No.
Notes.
Well, we can't, what I'm saying is, do we want Adam to come back with?
oh, I
One,
get,
two,
okay,
ready.
I get
With
you.
1 and 2,
Okay.
1 and 2 ready?
Oh, I'll go ahead and do
Yeah.
the updates for our next one.
Okay,
We'll
well
have-
then we could be
Okay.
looking at it, yeah.
Because, I mean, because the chapter 3 is things that are a little bit more,
It doesn't have anything really to do with the way we run
doesn't
the
have anything to do with the procedure.
procedures.
Would you like to sign adjournment?
Yes, we are now adjourned.
Okay.
No.